The queen recently hadn't been feeling quite herself. She felt more bored than usual. She tried to figure out the reason for this feeling and realized that recently. What had given her pleasure for so many years was missing: scandals and gossip. Lady Whistledown. All of Penelope's recent articles lacked the usual spark. She was writing simply for the sake of writing. The queen didn't like it. "I need to talk to Penelope," she thought. "Brimsley?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Summon Mrs. Crane to me, and make it urgent." "As you wished." Brimsley went to carry out the queen's command, but returned half an hour later. "So soon?" the queen asked, surprised. "Not exactly. You have a visitor." "An uninvited one?" "Indeed, but I think you'll find him interesting," Brimsley said with a twinkle in his eye. Brimsley always knew what pleased the queen, and trusting him, she ordered him to invite the guest in. "I hope it's worth my afternoon rest," she said, with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Your Majesty, thank you for seeing me," Colin said as he entered the room, bowing. His voice was filled with nervousness, but he tried to appear confident. The queen sat on her throne with a penetrating gaze that Colin could only describe as piercing. He grew a little more anxious. "What can your queen do for you, Mr. Bridgerton?" she asked, watching him with curiosity. Colin sighed, feeling his heart tighten with nerves. He gathered his thoughts, trying to find the right words. "Your Majesty, I come to you with a request that might seem unusual. Penelope Crane has served you faithfully. She has done much for your court, proving herself a dedicated and talented person. But I ask you to give her the freedom she deserves. She deserves more than to be tied to a single role." His voice was firm, though his eyes revealed the depth of his feelings for Penelope. Colin tried to control his emotions, but his heart was overflowing with love and concern for Penelope. He knew she deserved to be happy and free, and he was willing to do anything to make that possible. "Penelope has devoted much time and effort in serving you," he continued, his voice growing more confident. "She has always been loyal to you, Your Majesty, despite all the challenges and trials she's had to endure. I ask you to consider freeing her from this work so she can follow her dreams and be truly happy." The queen listened intently. She noted how Mr. Bridgerton's eyes sparkled when he spoke about Penelope, how his voice quivered with emotion, and how much she meant to him. She realized that Colin wasn't saying everything, but his body language revealed much. And what, pray tell, would make her truly happy? She dreams of writing a novel. The queen paused for a moment, her face taking on a serious expression. Just then, a servant entered, letting her know that a guest was already awaiting an audience. Brimsley relayed the message to the queen. "Send in Penelope," she said, never breaking eye contact with the gentleman standing before her. Colin froze with shock and nerves. His heart began to race, and he couldn't hide his worry. "Don't worry, Mr. Bridgerton," she said with a slight smile. "You've said your piece. Now I want to hear hers." That day, Penelope had been going about her usual activities, but her heart had felt uneasy for days. She felt burdened by a weight she could no longer bear. The previous evening, she decided to gather her courage and request an audience with the queen. She wasn't yet sure what she would say, but was certain the conversation had to take place. She imagined explaining to the queen that she no longer wished to write as Lady Whistledown. She imagined the queen's anger and the punishment she would choose for taking away her favorite pastime. But she had to do it, and she had to confess to Colin. He needed to hear the truth from her. Every thought of Colin made her heart race. She realized she didn't want to spend another minute without him. Though they hadn't crossed paths in the large house, she could feel his presence everywhere. She could smell his cologne and knew he'd recently been in the room. Her feelings for him had grown so strong that it brought back familiar pain, as when they had lived across from each other. Why can't we go back to the past when we were children? We were both so carefree and unburdened by the pain of our choices. At that moment, Ray entered the room and said that the queen wished to see her. Penelope was surprised, as she hadn't planned to see her today, but she obeyed, despite the wave of anxiety that swept over her. "Your Majesty, how can I be of service?" "I thought our meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, and I haven't yet prepared the new column," Penelope began, trying to maintain calm and confidence in her voice. The queen, sitting on her throne, looked at her intently. Her eyes sparkled with wisdom and insight. "Mrs. Crane, do you know why I chose not to punish you, but rather made you my courtier when I discovered your secret identity?" the queen asked, her voice soft but firm. Penelope froze, trying to understand the queen's intentions. Had the time come to pay the price for being Lady Whistledown? But why now? Penelope gathered her courage and said, Because you, your majesty, are very noble, she replied cautiously. Her eyes betrayed her fear, and her voice trembled with nervousness. Smart and very clever. I see that time spent with my granddaughter has rubbed off on you. Very well, that is indeed why. I don't often see women willing to risk everything, hungry for adventure and freedom, and when I do, I don't let them slip by. Perhaps you have spent all this time watching me in my court, but that doesn't mean I haven't noticed anything. I've been watching you, Penelope, and I can say I even know you. But the one thing I've never seen in you during all our time together is true happiness in your eyes when you look at a loved one. The queen spoke quietly, with a smile, as though she knew exactly what she was talking about. She had loved and been loved. As I recall, I gave you complete freedom. Penelope didn't know what to say in response, especially to the queen. Trying to regain her composure, she replied, I cherish my husband deeply, and am grateful to your majesty for helping me find a suitable match. Enough. The queen interrupted, her voice full of command. You know better than to lie to me. Speak the truth. The truth? But what do you mean, your majesty? Penelope was thrown off balance, her thoughts swirling. The queen gazed at Penelope, her look piercing. I'm talking about the most important feeling in the world, love. You once loved. I know this because I've seen it in you. In your eyes, in your articles, in the end. They lost that charm you had at the beginning. You should have noticed that by now. Penelope was at a loss. Her thoughts were jumbled and her heart was beating faster. What happened to Lady Whistledown? What have you done with her? I no longer need her. I see. And what do you need? Who? Penelope whispered, but the queen had excellent hearing and didn't miss a thing. And who might that be? The queen nearly rose from her chair. Finally, this conversation was taking an interesting turn. Penelope was silent. She wanted to cry, to flee from the room and hide in a dark corner, hugging her knees. She would never have the courage to tell him how she really felt. I thought you were a brave woman. It seems I was mistaken. I loved him from the first moment, from the first day. And I kept on loving him, even when he didn't notice me. I waited and hoped that he would choose me when we got older. But he didn't choose me. He chose my cousin. And my jealousy robbed me of my sanity. I was there, supporting him, laughing at his jokes, but he just didn't see me as a woman. But he saw it in Marina, whom he'd known for only a few days. And even her secret didn't stop him. He was ready to lay the world at her feet. I was used to my family not caring about me, to my voice meaning nothing in society. But I thought I had him. And it turned out I was nothing to him all along, just like I was to everyone else. But that was the final straw, and I decided that no one would dare to underestimate me again. So I began to write. I poured all my anger, all my pain, everything I had kept inside me into my articles, and people loved it. So I kept writing. And I didn't notice when my articles started to bring pain to others. She paused to take a breath and wipe away the tears that had blurred her vision. God, how much pain she had bottled up inside. She looked at the queen, waiting for a response. The queen listened attentively, not interrupting. Her face was calm, but her eyes sparkled with interest. She was waiting for more. And soon I had to pay the price for it. First, I lost my best friend. And then he finally noticed me. But by then, I was too tied to Lady Whistledown. And this time, I made the choice. I chose her, thinking it was forever. And life punished me. The first time. She placed a hand on her stomach. And I kept on ruining lives, even when I didn't want to, as if it had become a part of me. Everything I touched was doomed to suffer, and I was punished a second time. Now both her hands were on her stomach. She leaned forward, feeling nauseated by herself and her words. She took a moment to breathe through her nose, trying to regain her composure. I want to keep writing, she continued with what little strength she had left. But not about others' lives, about mine, about the one I dreamed of. About the one it could have been. I want to write about hope, not destruction. At least in books, I want to be happy, she cried out, and it seemed to drain all her strength because she felt her legs could no longer support her, and she began to fall. Suddenly, strong arms caught her and held her tight. I'm here, she heard Colin's voice. It's all right, I've got you. She couldn't believe it was him, that he had heard everything. And he wasn't angry. His voice held no anger, only concern and support. I love you, she said, not even realizing she was saying it. For a moment, her heart overpowered her mind. In my room, At the ball, I wanted it too. He stayed silent, letting her say everything she needed to. The power of her heart didn't last long, and jumping to her feet, she moved away from him and said, I took the children from you. I knew how much you loved them and that George would take them from you, and I did it anyway. It doesn't matter because we're together again, but you will never be able to. I can't give you your own children. I tried and I couldn't even do that. You deserve to be a father. You always wanted to be a father, and you can't deny yourself that. The only thing I can't deny myself is you. Without you, none of this matters. He carefully began to approach her. Let me in, and we will find hope together. In real life. She looked at him, fearful. No matter what she said or did, he wouldn't back down. And as if he had read her mind, he said, I won't back down. At that moment, her mind retreated. Beside him, she would always be safe. There was no need to keep everything under control. She could relax. So she gave her heart the green light, and she melted into his embrace. Just don't forget to write all this down. They suddenly heard a voice behind them. They had completely forgotten that the Queen had been there the whole time. She had seen and heard everything. And yes, she continued, already rising from her chair, I should be the first to read that novel. As she began to leave, she looked back one last time, and they could both swear they saw a small tear in her eye.